we are directly moving to the next panel without a coffee break. So this panel is about standard peer communities that will continue this discussion and the relation of postnormal science and participatory action research. We have 4 presentations, but 3 presentations, sorry, because Angela will link 2 of the presentation in one. And the first one is Zora Kovacic for University of Bergen, yeah? And she would talk about the logic of KER and the governance of the water, food, energy nexus. Okay. Thank you. You have 15 minutes. I have 15 minutes, okay. And this, okay. So I'll give a little bit of context about the, I'm going to talk about the project that I'm working on.
A microphone.
Yes. Do I have to sit? Then maybe sit. Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. So a little bit of context. This is a European project that I'm working on that is called MAGIC, and it stands for Moving Towards Adaptive Governance in Complexity. And it focuses on this idea of the nexus between water, energy, and food. One of the ideas of the project is to challenge unthinking consensus in policy and science making. And so the idea is to look at what type of narratives are used to inform or think about problems that have to do with the nexus, and compare these, contrast them with different narratives as a way to challenge the way that things are done. And so one argument that is built into how the project is run is that the answers that we get to policy questions are the product of the way we carry out the analysis. And so the idea is to try and carry out different types of analysis and see what happens. This is based on this approach that is called qualitative storytelling. So the idea is to look at narratives. We look at narratives by talking to policy officers, especially in the European Commission, but also some associated agencies. From there, we try to agree which are the narratives that are relevant in policy discussions. Then we run this through this sort of the museism, which is a quantification tool that allows to compare narratives, to build different narratives, and to see what the different narratives are doing. And then the idea is to bring this back to the dialogue with the policy officers. So there is this idea of an iterative process. There is this idea of having some sort of participatory process and doing this challenging work in a dialogic way. So this is inspired by PNS. What we try to do when we're doing this quantitative analysis is to identify also some uncertainties, communicate these uncertainties, identify some of the complexities in dealing with the interactions between policies that deal with agriculture, with food, water, etc. Communicate these uncertainties, and then the question is, so what happens then? If we want to do this in a PNS-inspired way, the idea is not to dump all of this information on whoever we're talking to and sort of shift the responsibility of dealing with this mess that we sometimes find to the policymakers, but rather to use a different logic. And we were thinking, so how do we do this? How do we do this in a good way? And one idea that was talked about in the consortium was to use this logic of care. Logic of care as opposed to logic of choice. So here we can use the parallel with the patient care in hospitals, where instead of giving all the information to someone and then they have to make the choice, the logic is, okay, we actually maybe try to care for the patient and not just leave them to make the difficult choice. So can this be translated to the type of relationship that as scientists, we are trying to have with the policymakers that we are in contact with, and if we can, how do we do that? So some of the ideas are, for example, instead of just communicating results, to try and have a dialogue about the results, and so this is why we think about this as an iterative process. Instead of going occasionally in and giving information, speaking truths of some sort, try to have a continued dialogue, continued interaction, and see what happens after we have said something. And try to communicate, no, instead of just simplifying the message so that it's clear, try to maybe communicate some of the complexity and see what happens then. So the idea is to try and arrive at a deep understanding of processes of policy making, because we think that this will contribute to improving the use of science for policy. If we understand better what is going on, then we can act with this logic of care, and that should help. This is a little bit the aspiration of the project. And at the same time, another or maybe similar or related principle is this idea of also applying sort of an ethics of care. So it's not just the care about the process or the person, the policymaker that I am in contact with, but also care for the issue at hand. So what is MAGIC concerned with is this nexus thing, and so, for example, caring about the different policies, how they interact with each other, what type of problems may arise if I only care about water and don't think about energy and food, to simplify a little bit, but this is the idea. And so what does it mean to care also about the issue? It means that sometimes I feel like the ethical thing to do is to communicate some of this uncomfortable knowledge, to say something that maybe is not necessarily what the other person wants to hear, but if I really care about some of these issues we're dealing with, then uncomfortable things should be said as well. Okay, so how has this worked in practice? This is very preliminary. But I'd like to share with you one of the case studies, one of the policies that we are working with in the project, which is the circular economy. Just a very quick definition for those of you who are not familiar with this. The idea of the circular economy is that, according to the Commission, it's an economy where the value of products, materials, and resources is maintained in the economies for as long as possible, and the generation of waste is minimized. So the idea is to change from a linear economy where things are just used, consumed, and discarded to a more circular economy, which has economic advantages, very importantly. So we took this narrative of the circular economy and we contrasted it with some different narratives. This is the idea that I was talking about before of challenging consensuses. So comparing this with other visions, and one thing we compared this with was this perspective that comes from social metabolism studies, where the idea is that an economy is some sort of metabolic system that uses material inputs, metabolizes them, and this is how it works. And in this metabolic system, this is a figure that is taken from Herman Daly. I guess most of you will be familiar with it. But in this metabolic system, the idea is that one can take resources from the environment when there are resources to be taken. And so in the transition from an empty world to a full world, then there are less and less resources outside of the economic system that have to be taken. What this means also is that one of the functions that one free rides on in an empty world, which is the recycling, then needs to be internalized within the economic system as the system grows, and that has consequences. No? The idea is that becoming circular is not something just that happens for free, but it changes, for example, the speed at which resources can be used, because before just using them, one has to produce them, and so it may have some consequences for how the economy works. We also compared this, I don't know if this is a comparison, because this figure that you see here is actually part of one of the communications of the Commission itself. So we see that the Commission is also considering different narratives about circular economy and what it is and what it means. And this is a type of analysis that also comes from like environmental economics. And here it's a measurement of all the materials that an economy uses. They are measured in terms of weight. And what you see is that only 6% of the materials are recirculated. No? So what comes out of this type of analysis is that the economy is not circular, very far from being circular at the moment. Yeah, this type of representation, of course, can be and has been criticized, because what is included here, for example, are the energy flows, which yeah, of course, energy cannot be recirculated because one cannot make CO2 emissions, recycle them into gasoline again. And so the criticism is that maybe it doesn't make sense to take that into account. And so we don't need to be so pessimistic about the potential for circularity. But beyond this, there are also some other considerations, like, for example, the fact that if we take seriously the argument that recycling means slowing down the economic process, this has consequences for economic growth. It means that it has consequences also for debt servicing, because if things are going slower, then there is less profit. And this is something important, considering that the circular economy proposals, they came out in 2014, 2015, when the Commission was dealing with the effects of the economic crisis and the economic slowdown in the Union. So this is not a negligible possible side effect, but it's something that, yes, could potentially delegitimize the whole policy proposal. And then other type of challenges to this narrative are also equity considerations. For example, I was reading a report from Ministry of Energy in South Africa that was worrying about the fact that if Europe becomes circular, they lose a market to export things to, and that would be a disaster for their economy. Yes, Europe is not circular yet, but who would this type of vision benefit? And there's a project of sustainability for Europe that then becomes a problem for somewhere else. So there's many considerations here. No? Okay, so we did this is the part of the process in the project that I was showing you, where we do our analysis with the contrast, blah, 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 and then we go and we present some of our results back to some of the policy officers that we had interviewed and that we had contacted in the project. And the type of response that we got was that we had to understand, it was very important, that we have to maintain a positive connotation when talking about the circular economy, despite its limitations. Of course, it has limitations, but it's important to talk about it in positive terms because of the potential that this has in mainstreaming environmental issues into policy. So one thing that we found out was that for some of the policymakers that we talked to, the circular economy was a means to include environmental concerns in policy, especially at a time of economic crisis in the Commission, where the priority is given to economic growth, creating jobs, recovering from the crisis, and then environmental issues may be just put aside for the moment because there's more urgent things to think about. And so talking about the circular economy and how this can be, thank you, this can help with economic growth is a way not to avoid this, to avoid being put aside. No? So there's something, there's a high commitment to this idea. There was talk about we're going in the right direction and you have to understand this is important. Of course there are problems, but there is something important here. So, I only have 2 minutes, so maybe I skip this. So what we find here is that some of the policy officers that we talk to, they are in an impossible situation. So if we if we use this logic of care, no, and we say, okay, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to empathize with the policymaker. I'm trying to understand what they're trying to achieve. What are they trying to achieve? They tell me that they're trying to get these economic concerns not to be set aside. I can empathize with that. Obviously, I understand. It's not a bad thing, no? But then, in contrast to this is, if I go by the ethics of care, and I see that this idea of circular economy doesn't really have a lot of scientific legitimacy, what do? Do I shut up? Is it ethical to just use sloppy science because the cause is good? Should I care more for the process or more for the issue itself? So what the idea is that I don't want to answer that question. I think that it's problematic that I have to ask that question. I think that the problem is that the logic of care and the ethics of care don't coincide, and they should. And if they don't, it's because we find ourselves working in institutions where the expectations is that we provide solutions. And this is a problem. And we don't, yes, this is a problem. And there is no institutional space to just reflect and to just do something other than provide a solution, to be able to speak in non-positive terms. So, yeah, very, very preliminary, but we are thinking that maybe what we are learning from this whole process is that there is a need for institutional change rather than to compromise what type of ethics. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for sticking right on time. Since we are a little bit behind schedule, I will maintain the rule of taking all questions by the end. Next speaker is Martin O'Connor. His talk is entitled Ambitions and Limits of a Deliberative Extended Peer Community for QDA. I guess you will explain what that is now, around science in the digital age.
Excuse me, I have to find my presentation.
Yes.
Is there a method for this?
Can you help?
Panel 2. Martin O'Connor. Oh. Wait, it's in Chinese. Go where? I don't know how to do that. Thank you.
This is what you want.
That's what I want. Okay, thank you. Firstly, thank you to all the talks already today, because I think you've partly answered some of my questions that I'm suffering from. Second, this topic is a sort of update of two problems that were with me when I came to Europe in the early 90s. One, we can put it at the level of anecdote. I was one of the people who started to engage in questions about quality in the context of the nascent post-normal science. I met Jerry and Silvio in 1987, and I remember some unfinished... In Barcelona. You're quite right. That was not about quality, it was about Plato's cave, but it's another story. I had unfinished discussions with Silvio at ISPRA in the early 90s, where for some reasons which I've never theorized about, the problematique of quality went off to one side. We got involved in lots of important environmental uncertainty, social process questions, but somehow that core question lapsed to some extent. The second context, I remember that one of the areas I've worked in, keeping in mind that academically, with all the justifications that that brings or doesn't have, I've worked in building theory and practice of deliberative processes, and I was confronted frequently by honest questions from intelligent people like Juan Martinez-Ellier or John O'Neill. But Martin, what do we say when we know that the power structure is so polarized and that the attitude of people is such that they simply do not see why they should bother to engage in an open deliberation, especially if they can drive a steamroller over the opposition? So those are questions which remain unanswered, and they're in the topic here. Now, I've just seen when I was testing my PowerPoint that I've got transitions built in which I didn't plan on, so there's a little bit of decoration that's not part of the game. I'm trying to present in my 10 minutes left a research agenda which is not out of date. When I started these questions, 1980, 1990, we didn't have the internet. Now we're all drowned in the digital society. I'm going to tell the story partly by exploiting one of Borges' stories. Some of you know Borges is a fan of Silvio, and I'm a fan of Silvio, so I'm a fan of Borges, and vice versa. But I'm going to use a story which is called The Congress in order to express what I consider to be some fundamental difficulties with the ideal of a plural, deliberative process for building an extended peer community around knowledge quality, which is the motif of post-normal science as I understand it. So today I'm on the antithesis side. I've worked in my honest way. I could make a little list of all the small projects I've done during 30 years, trying to show the benefits and hope of deliberative processes for building dialogue capacity with different dimensions of knowledge and unknowledge. But today I'm confronted with the fact that this hope is being dismayed, and I want to get some hope back. So I'm hoping that you can help. Okay? Now, what I'm going to present in a very summary way is a structure, a type of model, if you like, of building deliberation around knowledge. This is the type of structure that Jean-Marc Douguet, who's with me, and I and other people have worked with for many years. So we're talking about tools that we know how to use. Sorry, went too far. Congress of Science? No. That's not where it should be. It should be at the end. I was working on the question of quality and responsibility in science, and various circumstances, including a workshop that I organized with some people here, like Andrea and others, were present at. We explained that we need to be concerned about quality and responsibility around science. And that means we deal with three questions: structure a process of deliberation, who is asking questions, who is judging, who is the victim, what are we talking about, and why are we concerned about things. But if we're looking at science, keep in mind I'm an economist and I work with people in organization theory management, we've got the life cycle, we've got upstream, we've got doing science, and we've got downstream, which we could consider are the effects of science. So I wrote up a story where I made a synthetic typology. This will come out in a book in a few weeks on behalf of my colleagues, where I said the question of what's going on is not just doing science, it's who is investing in science, also what are the effects of using or misusing knowledge. And we used the example in the paper of the Dieselgate, where there was a relatively small-scale fraud. It was a small-scale fraud in an internal business context, a little bit of fabrication of data and misrepresentation of results. But this was dealing with a sectoral scale of thousands of millions of euros and dealing with issues which are considered to be core critical issues: greenhouse gas emissions, pollution of urban air, health, and life and death, as well as financial interests of millions of people. So a small type of ordinary fraud with very big downstream conditions, but also with quite significant upstream consequences, because that controversy, partly going through the law courts, has had a significant impact on the legitimacy of the automobile industry and on the financial interests of some of the people involved. So that was the sort of context where I said, I want to see how we can systematize the question of asking questions about integrity in the science process, in the upstream parts of building that process, in the downstream parts of the consequences of knowledge and its use. We can ask the downstream part in terms of social acceptability, but we have to say, who do we ask, who judges, and what are the grounds of their judgment? So I bring the problem back into something that's old business for people like me, multi-criteria, multi-actor evaluation, look at a process in its different aspects, different categories of people building their judgments, and building their judgments by relating to different sets of reasons about what's acceptable or not acceptable. Now, in fact, I could make a comment about the talk just before with, I think it's Ariella. How do we build the perimeter around this? And the answer is that by presumption, the perimeter is built by the people who are being brought in or brought in through proxy in this process. They are going to communicate their judgments, which means that they put on the agenda their piece of what's important to them. So when we build these processes, and some of you know that we have done this type of work, then we say that we will build a structure where the sets of performance or quality issues or the acceptability questions, they are inclusive at a high level of synthesis, but inside that, people can bring their own message, their own signal, and that process is left open, because otherwise we have an exclusion problem. Now, we thought we can apply this framework to knowledge quality assessment in controversial situations. Theoretically, it's possible, but in practice, will it work? If we want to build it in a very schematic way, we look at who are the actors who make up the extended peer community. Maybe these include future generations. Maybe these include mollusks and non-human life. I don't know. We look at the quality integrity criteria, and it turns out that this is a vast question. And we apply this matrix framework to look at any hotspot of knowledge development, knowledge practice. So we know how to do this. If someone gave us a permanent funding process and we could employ doctoral students and slave labor, we could build up an entire database around knowledge controversies. So why is this not going to happen? We could learn about the costs borne. We could learn about the costs caused. We could learn about the distribution of notions about responsibility for quality or the breakdown of quality. We could see how liability is attributed morally and so on. All of this we have tools to do. So why is this not going to solve our problems? Well, on a bad night, I jump across the question of what are the norms of quality? And I go into the question of, will we be able to build this story? But first of all, if we look at responsibility and we ask the question, responsibility for whom, for what, and why? Look at the list on the left. It's the only part of the structure of a problem I'm going to go into in detail. This is the list of the 9 dimensions of wealth and poverty, or deprival, or deprivation, that's put together a long time ago by Max Neef. I find it better than the lists that we use quite often in the literature from Amartya Sen about capacities. If you look through that list, you see that 7 out of the 9 are relational properties. What he's saying is that poverty is about the quality of relations. So he's also saying that we are concerned with dimensions of economic capacity, environmental capacity, but above all, the quality of the relations that people can have inside their communities. So poverty is about being deprived, but being deprived is not only material, of course. Well, we know that, but it's important that it's said. So we said that if we want to look at whether science or innovation is responsible, we can build up a multi-actor, multi-criteria judgment process about whether we or you or others are being shat upon. So we can do a distributed cost-benefit analysis, and we can let people express in what dimensions their sense of being excluded, deprived, violated is taking place. This is good social science from my point of view. But will it solve anybody's problems? Well, this is where I got into difficulties, because I thought that with the social networking technologies, Google interfaced with Facebook, I can have all human beings engaged in this process of building intelligence around all knowledge issues, around all controversies. So this is now possible, the technology is available, this is perfect. And fortunately, before I tried to get funding from Google to do this, they're already trying to do it, but they'll fail. I read back on a dark night The Congress by Borges, who gave a metaphor, which is in a sense rather sad, but also rather important, I think, about in what ways this model of good practice is likely or even doomed to fail. Now, if his metaphor is pertinent, and I think it is, that means that this is an antithesis for some of the hopes of post-normal science. Now, keep in mind, I'm a very deeply committed, dedicated person, which means that if I dive into an antithesis, it's because I need to get back out. So help me get back out before the end of my talk. What Borges has explained through his metaphor, which I'm going to take you through in a simplified way, is that there are three impossibilities about representation, who is engaged in the deliberation, about documentation, what's the knowledge base, and these lead on to some deep mess, which I call a communication problem. It's a problem of non-reconciliation. So let's see if I can do it in 1 minute. Representation is the obvious part of Borges' story. A crowd of people somewhere in the Argentinian, or I think it was Uruguayan Pampas, sat down to work out who should be the delegates of the World Congress, and it obviously is an impossible problem. We can solve it now with social networking. 100 million people in Brazil were the object of systematic manipulation with WhatsApp in order to not vote based on the facts. So we know how to engage people in deliberative processes. How do we deal with the documentation? In the story, some of the madmen, as part of the planning process of the Congress, decided that they need to have a reference library. They got completely hysterical about this and concluded that they needed to bring together every single document, read the paragraph. The younger Pliny, according to whom there is no book so bad that it does not contain some good. Well, haven't you heard that somewhere? All opinions are valid, and even equally valid, which is a very strange concept. Google is making it possible now for all facts, non-facts, misfacts, and just bullshit to be expressed. Now, Borges had anticipated this quite explicitly in another story, which is called The Library of Babel, and he constructed the metaphor of a universal library with every book and text that could or could not even exist. Everything, he says, the minutely detailed history of the future, the archangel's autobiographies, the faithful catalogue of the library itself, thousands and thousands of false catalogues. What was that problem we had? Alternative facts. So that's the problem with documentation. We can't get out of the hole. So we are dragged into a reality where there is irreconciliation. It's not a problem that is multiple facets of knowing. It's the fact that we can't get our shit together, but it's worse than that, because many people don't see any reason to get their shit together with you. So that's what we need to deal with. What is it that permits to build community or not? Now, I'm going to try to steal 30 seconds. Borges, I have to, because otherwise I can't ask my question of how to get me out of the hole. Borges, in his story, he seemed to throw in the towel. He said, well, at a certain moment, they realized that this conference is a complete absurdity, this Congress. So he tells everybody, take out the books, burn them. Now, keep in mind that burning the Library of Alexandria is a famous symbolic and historical event. And Borges knows about this one very well. But He says, I've realized just that this idea of having a Congress where humanity has got delegates representing, he never explained what it was supposed to talk about. This is a foolishness because the Congress already exists. Now, what does this mean? Post-normal science, we shouldn't try to design it, we shouldn't try to do it because it just happens. Is it an adequate conclusion? Obviously, Borges is being ironical. This story he wrote quite late in his life. He said that of the collection in the book, this story was the one he wanted to keep. So where's the hope? I don't think he expresses explicitly a hope, but I still think we should go looking for it, and that's the question that I want to leave with us today. Where does the hope come from? Somebody said earlier, maybe it was Silvio, but maybe someone else, post-normal science is not value-free, so what are its values? And how do we build them? Now, the talking about stretched collaboration, for me, goes in the right direction, but we need to really stretch. Because how do I build collaboration and engagement with the madmen who don't think that I need to be on the planet with them? Thank you.
Okay, and finally, Ângela Pereira. Ângela Guimarães Pereira. So, you're gonna do 2 presentations in a row. You were supposed to have like half an hour of this, but if you can like shorten them a little bit because we're quite far behind schedule, so we, try to leave at least 15 minutes for the final discussion, please. Okay.
So, I'm not either Thomas Völker, neither Paulo Rosa. They should be here doing the presentations, but I have to do it. So, just a quick line of introduction. I'm not in academia. I'm in the European Commission, so it's a different way of looking at things, perhaps. Right. So, in fact, I had 2 presentations, but I made up one. So I even invented a new title. So it's called Engagement from Below, Meanings, Aspirations and Movements to Extend the Peer Community at the European Commission. So I suppose you all know this guy. I have to be careful because there is another colleague from the European Commission here in the room. Anyway, so what I'm going to talk primarily about citizen engagement, specifically how we are handling this at the European Commission. So what I want to say is that this talk of citizen engagement is not new at all in the Commission. I remember, and Silvio was involved on that. For example, in the beginning of the 2000s, there was a white paper on governance of the European Union, and citizen engagement was a very important line on that white paper. So what has been happening in the last years is a sort of trying to institutionalize this talk within the policy-making mechanisms. And this has been going on, as I said, for more than 20 years now. So the most recent thing, let's say, initiative is this better regulation agenda, which seeks to involve citizens and other actors in policy making. In fact, the president of the European Commission had vowed that he wanted to be the president of social dialogue. And in fact, there are many mechanisms at the level of the European Commission that try to foster engagement of different actors. So if in the parlance of post-normal science, try to engage different communities. And I'm just listening here some like the citizens' dialogues where many people go, commissioners and others go to countries and have conversations with people. Interestingly, this year there has been already almost 600 of these things, these happenings. But also the European Citizen Initiative, which is an initiative that requires 1 million of signatures from different people at the Commission, at the member states, sorry, to propose issues to be in the agenda of policy. Unfortunately, I think there are problems with the following up of these initiatives. I don't have time to go there in detail. And this better regulation package is probably the most, let's say, serious attempt. Più forte. The most serious attempt to engage citizens in a way that is not just, you know, communicating or science reaching out, as they say, but and going even a little bit beyond consultations. And there are many portals to do that. Basically, that's how it is done. It is done through the internet and so on. But there are many. I'm not even going to ask you how many of you know about these portals because it's useless. So, but recently, and this is, I think, where it comes my conversation today, is that we have been, as a group in the Joint Research Center, we were given a mission to put together a community of practice on citizen engagement. And when I asked this, I will go to this question again, engagement from below. It's really, we not only were given this mission, but we also can actually explore whether we can do it at all at the level of such an institution. I must say, because we are in a PNS event, that the background of all this actually started with a project on quality assurance by extended peer communities. But this is not wording that people in Brussels understand. And therefore, we had to change. And so the thing became citizen engagement. So this is the first thing I want to say. Now, the interesting context for this to develop is that actually we are a site of post-normal science at the JRC. Silvio was there 1 year before me, as I will be there 27 years next January. It means that at least 28 years we have been trying to operationalize issues of post-normal science. So, and in fact, we have been exploring this issue through many projects, but also throughout, you know, all the places where we could go and voice these ideas of, for example, extended peer community and so on. In this definition, what we take in our endeavor right now, not only is that the extended peer community is about all those that have the desire to participate in the resolution of the issue, but the issue, but as a matter and an effort to increase the quality assessment of problem solving. But the important thing about this definition for us at the moment is participants can enhance the quality of the problem solving processes themselves. So it's much more than just for us a review, but really building and co-creating something. Now, we have done many things to put this together, and we have been continuing experimenting with different types of engagements. We are also part of the MAGIC project that Zora presented earlier. We raised an awareness of these issues, but it was important to us to understand, I mean, what was people, especially at the JRC, making of citizen engagement? What are the meanings with which they work and so on? So with Thomas, we embarked in this project of talking to people at the JRC to unveil a certain number of questions. We did 26 in-depth interviews, 3 focus groups, and the citizens panel. And the questions we were interested in were, what are the models of participation and democracy that become visible in the JRC's projects? What are the rationales for engagement? And how are understandings and practices of engagement constitutive with institutional orderings? And we are still looking at all this material, because this project started earlier this year. But we already see that there are a lot of challenges that have been identified and that won't go away. First of all, we are an institution within the institutions of the European Union that has some very important political constraints. So we have the Parliament, in principle, is let's say the institution that represents citizens. So what is the role of citizen engagement when we do it at the level of the Commission? Then we have another issue, which is 28 member states with different ideas of what the Commission should be doing, and especially what the Commission should be doing in terms of citizen engagement. Then we have issues of trust that need to be tackled. And then there are institutional challenges, like, okay, we organize these citizen engagements. What do we make of this? Of these citizen engagements? How do we use the outcomes and so on? And I will go there later. When we do these engagements, who are we excluding? And what do we do about this with the people that we exclude? And then many methodological issues. There is, this ambition of scalability that we have to deal with, and that once we do for somewhere, we have to do it everywhere, elsewhere, and this kind of, let's say, colonial still thinking, no? That you can export things everywhere, decontextualizing. Then there is always the issue of representativeness. It's another specter. And then the replicability, and then many methodological issues that actually were discussed also by the people we invited to these discussions. Now, specifically on the mapping, what we saw is that there are multiple engagements with implicit models and assumptions going on. I mean, there is many conceptions of these. For example, who are we involving? I mean, there was not a word, defining of word of who are we involving at the JRC. So across the interviews and the focus groups and so on, we talk about citizens, public, users, prosumers, consumers, community, patients, audience, indigenous actors, people, stakeholders, and sometimes even, with some equivalence, which of course not. Then the narrative, basically that we saw in this through our work, of justifying, why should we be doing this, is not surprising. surprisingly, that citizen engagement is a sort of silver bullet for many things. For the post-fact world, right? We are going to counteract populism and some big ambition for this citizen engagement. We are going to solve the legitimacy crisis and also the democratic deficit of our institutions once we start doing citizen engagements. We are going to counteract this alienation of European Union publics, and even that we are, through citizen engagement, we are expected to settle controversies and bring some sort of actually some sort of closure once you do this. But this is our reflection, no? But this is the expectation. And then the other interesting expectation is empowerment. This is one more recent, and I think we need to still figure out what they mean by that. What in this thing, what seems to not emerge as such is the quality assurance aspect that post-normal science and the concept of extended period community puts forward. And unless, of course, you interview our own group, then this will emerge. Now, this, as you all probably know, this ladder of Sherry Harnstein on work that she has done while she was at the Ministry of or Department of Housing in the US. This is from 1969, and interestingly, this is completely still I mean, descriptive of what goes on, at least in this institution. And indeed, we found that a lot of projects and a lot of ambitions are, you know, on the different steps of this ladder. So, for example, we found that the deficit model is very alive and well. I mean, this idea of citizen engagement as outreach. I had a recent conversation with the director at the GRC, and I was explaining what we were doing, and he reduced the whole thing to public outreach. So, this is a difficult model to. Am I doing with time? There is a lot of acceptance politics in the discourse of people that we interviewed. So, where is citizen engagement as a way, you know, for people to accept better the policies that the Commission puts forward. And so it makes you wonder, are we talking about engagement or endorsement? And what is more problematic for us is that there can be some foreclosure of more radical forms of participation. But we are taking care of that. Now, I think this book by Jason, edited by Jason Chilvers and Matthew Kearns, really also resonates, and this idea of the ecological conception of participation really resonates with this, because what we need to do here in these types of institutions is to make room for everything to coexist. The only thing that we sort of ask is that everyone understands what he or she is doing with when he or she is doing some type of engagement. So this is framing our future analysis, because, as I said, this is ongoing work. Okay. And this is because, have you heard about this summertime consultation? Before or after it came on the news? Ah, before. Have you voted? Well, good, me neither. But I had never even heard about that. So, and I think this, for me personally, disclaimer, me. This represents what we should not be doing at the European Commission. So if you look at the different texts that came out, first of all, this consultation was done during summertime for 6 weeks. The Commission page says that Juncker said that he's going to do something about it because 80% of 84% of respondents are in favor of putting an end of biennial clock challenge. But this text here is from The Guardian, actually, and it doesn't start very well. Jean-Claude Clora, the Commission's president, said a recent consultation had shown that more than 80% of EU citizens were in favor of the move, and this is not correct. It is true that it was the most well-responded consultation so far. I didn't know that this was even an issue. Now I know. But and the other thing that is interesting also with these numbers is that more than 80% of the people that responded were from Germany or German-speaking countries. So that is also interesting. Now, for me, the reflection was this. For whom was this an issue, and why is this an issue? And this has to do with framing agendas. How are we framing issues at the European Commission? Who said that this was an issue, no? And how is this relevant compared with, we have so many complex messes at the European Commission to deal with. Why are we devoting our time to this? All right, so this is another thing. The other thing is, well, who was excluded for the consultation? I was excluded. I didn't know about it. So who knows about these things? No, so these methods are not correct, right? And if this is so important, so and the question also is, should the Commission act so promptly on consultation results about truly hot issues? So that's another thing. And then the last question is, what's next? Canceling leap years? What's next, no? So, anyway, with this context, I like to say that our group is a bit subversive. And so we are trying, and we have been trying with different methodologies to deal, with citizen engagement at the Commission. And this is more or less the second part of what I have to say. So we have been very interested on the maker movement. And the maker movement is bottom-up, is quite widespread. And it's representative of very different things. Things that we are more interested in and things that we are less interested in. Like, for instance, it's about new models of education, it's about STEAM, consolidation, science, technology, arts, and it's about collaborative work, it's about innovation and so on. But what we are really interested in is on the aspects of DIY science. And as I say, this is a growing movement. And what has been enabling this movement is the presence of a lot of collaborative physical space. It's, as I said, it's quite widespread. There is one of the key pillars is the open source culture, and also it relies on making and on tinkering, on making, but while you are tinkering, you are also inquiring possibly what you are doing. There are many projects around the world. For instance, this one is a RoboHand. Is a guy that lost 4 fingers, and he decided to build his own prosthetics because prosthetics were very, very expensive. It was in South Africa, if I'm not mistaken. SafeCast, where in the aftermath of Fukushima, people got together and built sensors to build radiation, to measure radiation and make sense of what was really going on in their homes and in their environment, because the government measurements were not deemed to be viable. This another project on beehives, trying to deal with the problem of bees and pollinators and so on in an open source way, air pollution and so on. There are much, but for us at the JRC, we see these as a site of citizen engagement, and citizen engagement from below, with which we want to connect with. And we see this as a site of extended peer communities and extended peer review. We have done already some work on this, I'm not going on. And we have, in order to connect to the movement, we have also our own makerspace now, because it is important, to be recognized. And why do we want this? Yeah, just a quick thing first. We think that this movement engages with actual matters of care, and we want this to be part of our work. We want to experiment with novel formats of societal engagement about techno-scientific innovations and others. We have been exploring a lot on material deliberation issues, and we want to explore the prospects for networking and continuous engagements. So we don't want to be that the citizen engagements that we organize are one shot, but these are continuous forms of engagements. And the other thing that is also interesting, and we talked about collaboration today, it's an interdisciplinary experiment, and we have a space to it, so we are trying to foster this as well. But the issue is, and I think this is my last slide, we are doing this at a dinosauric institution, right? Nothing to do with bottom-up and so on. And so my question is, can a dinosaur program an Arduino? So can we really aspire, do engagement from below? And the question is, what will the European Commission make of citizen engagement, or maybe who is going to program who? So this thing is a question for us, and we are exploring it. But anyhow, we have taken some decisions, and with this experiment of engaging with the maker movement, what we are doing is going where people already engage, and trying to foster partnerships with communities that are going. There's a lot of citizen engagement already around there. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We need to connect to what is going on there. The other thing is we want to go beyond post-it. We are fed up of these kinds of engagements, of post-it engagements. So we want to be more material, more experiential, and so on and so forth. And yeah, on doing this, we are actually trying to further the agenda of thinking about citizen engagement at the Commission as extended peer community and foster the quality framing. Thank you.